certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Ciara Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
WA gripped by fear.
All members of Western Australia have got a responsibility because these are our daughters and sisters.
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
On the night Ciara Glennon vanished, it's been revealed the man accused of the Claremont serial killings failed to show for a pre-planned weekend getaway. I'm Natalie Bonjolo. Welcome to Day 5 of Claremont in Conversation, and welcome, of course, to two of the most seasoned court reporters in WA, Tim Clarke and Ali Fan. Hello.
Hello.
Well, this was a very interesting revelation today.
Yeah, it was. It had sort of been flagged in previous iterations of the court hearings, but we got to hear it firsthand basically today. So this was a chap called Murray Cook, who was a good friend of Bradley Edwards back in the day. They used to play pool and have a beer together and also work together. And it all revolved around a couple of weeks in March 1997. When Mr. Cook unfortunately was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which is why it sticks in his mind. Mm-hmm. And he invited Mr. Edwards down to a holiday home in Dawesville, south of Perth, after he'd broken the news to him about his illness. And it just so happened that it coincided with the weekend in question when Miss Glennon went missing. And so the whereabouts of Mr. Edwards on those days becomes vitally important 22 and a half years later.
Because it is something, I guess, even though it is such a very long time ago, it is something you would remember when you've invited someone for the weekend away and they just don't turn up. And of course, so he never called.
Well, they were annoyed because he said he expected them for dinner. And when he finally came up the next day, he said, well, what the hell happened?
Right.
As you would. And he said, and this is a contentious part, he said he was told that he was reconciling with his ex-wife. Under cross-examination, the defence put to him, you sure that was exactly what he said? He didn't say, I'm having problems with a partner rather than his ex-wife, but he stuck to his story. But yes, he did remember it well, and he said he also remembered things because they were all related to birthdays. The reason they were down there, they were celebrating his wife's birthday and daughters' birthdays and mothers' birthdays. So he linked everything to those days, and they were the ones that, of course, you do remember.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. In these historic cases, and there are more and more of them coming up in court, to find a witness who can be so precise about dates and so precise about those memories. I mean, it's obvious. Any defence lawyer with half a grain of salt would obviously rely on that tyranny of time, if you like. That well, how can you possibly remember? But
he tried to do that, didn't he?
Well, he did, and he didn't get very far because Mr. Cook remembered exactly when he'd been diagnosed, as you would. Mm-hmm. He remembered that it was his wife's birthday on the 9th, his stepdaughter's birthday on the 10th, and his mother's birthday on the 21st. So that compacted that little passage of time perfectly, and on top of that, just so happens that his wife, who also gave evidence, was a meticulous diary keeper. Thank you very much, the prosecution gods, because she was able to turn up with her diaries and not only re-pinpoint those dates, but also point to some other dates back in January 1996, which, as we all know, are also very important, and Mr. Cook could also elaborate on. So, yeah, it was an interesting piece of historical memorisation that could become quite important. I've described it in the paper tomorrow as a reverse alibi, if you like. It was an alibi that was snatched away from Mr. Edwards, and as Ali said, as much as his lawyer tried to poke a few holes in it, he couldn't because the dates were so strong.
And the Sarah Spears one too, they remembered that very well.
Indeed.
Because he had to work overtime. He said in January, everybody's understaffed, people take holidays. And she remembered it was overtime because they didn't pay much overtime. So he was up there at Dumar House. And of course, they were working together just hours after Sarah Spears vanished on Australia Day 1996.
Yeah, and doing that timeline, so we heard during the opening about the supposed screams in Mosman Park, which are about 2:30 in the morning. And the Cooks said today that they remembered Mr. Edwards turning up at their house to either drive or get a lift to Doomar House at 7:30. So that would have just a gap of 5 hours. And well, we all know what the prosecution say Mr. Edwards did in those 5 hours, which is quite remarkable, really. If the prosecution's proved right of how he could be
Because he's
one
still
person in one part of the morning and a completely different person just 5 hours later, apparently.
And his demeanour doesn't change at all, does it?
No.
Doesn't waver. I was saying to someone, I said, look, it almost looks like he's just watching a boring movie.
Yeah.
Just his face doesn't change, his expressions don't change.
Yeah, as well. I mean, we alluded to yesterday. There were just a couple of snatches yesterday. I was watching the home movies on the screens that his face sort of lit up.
The child.
Yeah, and I watched this morning. He actually did follow Mr. Cook as he walked quite slowly into court because he was using a cane because of his affliction. He did follow him quite closely, but there was no mouthing of greetings or raising of eyebrows or anything. He's just been stoic all week.
And did you find out today whether he had remained friends with these people or whether they hadn't seen him for a long time before they've turned up in court today as witnesses?
Well, during the evidence, Mr. Cook said that after he got his diagnosis, the friendship with Mr. Edwards waned because he just really didn't have the energy to keep it up.
Right.
And
Sick leave and so forth.
Indeed,
yeah.
and then he was forced to leave work, obviously, and so we got the impression that relationship had drifted apart. But over time and after the time, but obviously for the prosecution and for the trial and for the case, that 14-month, 15-month period, right when they were very close, is obviously absolutely key.
What they did was they played pool together every Wednesday night. They started off as a friendship, just getting lifts home, and because they lived in the same neighbourhood, Bradley Edwards drove Murray Cook home, and they sort of began a friendship and played pool together every Wednesday. And that was about it, he said. Yeah.
And then on the point of when he did turn up at Dawesville, supposedly in the morning on the Saturday, he's said to the Cooks have naturally asked him, well, where were you, mate? You were supposed to come down, we'd probably cook you dinner, we waited up. And he just said, oh, I'm really sorry, I was trying to reconcile with my ex-wife. And they were like, well, okay, we've got no reason to disbelieve you. But if you remember going back to the first wife's evidence on the first day of evidence, she was pointedly asked, did Bradley ever try and reconcile with you at any point after you moved out and moved in with the new boyfriend? And she very pointedly said no.
Yep.
So they're going to point to, well, not only did he not turn up when he said on that critical night, he lied about it when he got there in the morning, or that's what they will say.
Well, the defence guy was saying that conversation was different.
Correct.
He said, you sure you said ex-wife? You sure it wasn't, I'm having problems with my current partner? But he didn't yield at all. He stuck to it.
Neither of them. I definitely remember hearing the word wife. They both said. So that was a bit of a tick for the prosecution.
And did the couple know that Ciara Glennon had gone missing the night before?
Yeah, that was probably...
That was strange, wasn't it?
It was spooky.
Yes.
They said there was no... We didn't have a phone, we didn't have a TV, we didn't have a radio down in Dawesville in 97. I don't know.
No.
They were both Telstra technicians. They probably could have sorted them out amongst each other. But
they said it was a real getaway place where they just...
yes,
that's
I'm
right,
being flippant, obviously.
Yeah.
But
For people who are interstate, Dawesville is a town about an hour south of Perth, and it's back in the 1990s. I mean, I would call it back then a bit of a sleepy town, a place where retirees
Where you went
lived,
crabbing.
where you went crabbing and fishing and had a little weekend getaway. So obviously back then, you know, they've had this house which doesn't have a telly and have no information coming through.
Yeah, exactly. And Mr. Edwards, from memory, said... Mr. Cook said in his evidence he stayed most of the day and then left. The Cooks stayed down a little bit longer, and Mrs. Cook said, we just didn't hear what happened, and obviously what had happened was Ciara had gone missing.
But even then, if they had known, they wouldn't have associated with this fellow that he plays pool with every Wednesday.
No one associated him with it for 25 years.
Exactly.
right.
There's no mention of Telstra vans or cars. Or,
Exactly.
Yeah, so...
Hindsight, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And it seems that these little things have happened, as you said, Tim, for 23 years. The dots were never been able to be joined up.
Absolutely. Well, my colleague John Flint wrote in the Sunday Times last weekend, hiding in plain sight, and that's exactly what the prosecution is saying he did for all those years, is that he was your archetypal family man, and the home videos and the pictures of him with a beard, on a boat in Fremantle and lying with the dog, and all these things, all these little personal indicia that we've had all week, gave absolutely no indication of what the prosecution say he was like when the sun went down.
It's ironic because when we were covering it at the time, a former Assistant Police Commissioner, Graham Linnett, rang me and said, it's someone who's around, it's someone who's been in strife before, he's still here, I believe. This profiling, he said, might work in the United States with the FBI, where you've got a couple of 100 million people. He said, but I believe just door knocking, and they've got the wrong guy with Lance Williams, that public servant that they virtually hounded to death. And he said, way back there's some guy that's around that's just still there, and I bet he's got previous form.
And when I was doing my research, preparing for the trial and looking back in old archive pieces from the West, after Ciara had gone missing, a former journalist at the paper had rung a psychologist in Perth to ask him what he thought might be the man that was doing these things, and the headline was he is an everyman. And that psychologist is still practicing today, and so he should be, because if he's right and the prosecution are right, he was absolutely right all those years ago.
Was Ciara Glennon's family in court today?
They've been, yes. Ciara's father and her sister have been there pretty well every day.
They've been there every day.
Every day. And could you see their reactions to this revelation that Bradley Edwards had not showed for this weekend getaway?
Dennis was absolutely immaculately turned out, as he always is. Brass buttons and blazer, and look, and it's obviously been a hugely taxing week. I haven't had any personal indication of that, but you can just imagine.
This wouldn't be strange to him. He would be aware. They would keep him briefed about what's happening in the bad parts and the gruesome parts, and I think they'd forewarn him because he's been escorted in with the police, and so nothing would be a surprise to what he's seeing.
Yes.
No, and Dennis, he looked well. He looked fine today, but you can imagine when the front doors have closed this week, there would have been a lot of soul searching, I'm sure.
His wife has written a book about it, and that's helped her considerably. Una Glennon, yes.
It's an amazing book, actually. I managed to get a copy of it last week because I'd never personally read it. It's called Ciara's Gift. It was published by UWA Press back in 2010, I think. Right. And she basically found that writing notes almost immediately after Ciara went missing for 10 years. She scribbled things down, thoughts, and just to purge herself of everything she was feeling. And she felt that really helped her. And then she combined it all, and I thoroughly recommend it. It's regardless of the subject matter, it's just an amazing treatise on how to deal with grief. Yes. And surprising revelations, or not revelations, the wrong word, but insights into how her and Dennis basically made their own paths. Yes. Sort of apart but together, if you know what I mean. They gave each other space. And it's beautifully written, so gentle and not the sort of heart-wrenching thing that you might imagine or others might think it would be. It's very calm in its phraseology, and it gives a wonderful insight into the family, particularly, but also how they dealt with it in the years after.
And she was quite right at the beginning. She actually said why is it that everybody's approaching my husband for comment and they haven't come to
Yeah,
me? And
very
I said, well,
interesting.
it was because we were probably, because he was at the forefront, we'd go to him thinking we were protecting her, but she actually
Yes.
wanted to articulate her feelings, and she did, and she felt this helped her along the way, along with her faith, that she could have her say about
Yes.
what her feelings were. But so we were thinking we were,
Doing the
protecting her,
right
doing the
thing
right
and-
thing as
yeah.
journalists, and yet she wanted to have her say.
Yeah.
Actually, we haven't seen or heard of any of the family of the accused, have we?
No.
They were quite sort of forthright at the beginning, and
They were. I've got to admit, I've never seen Mr. and Mrs. Edwards' parents in person, so I don't actually know whether they've been in court. I don't think they have been. His brother, Troy, who's been mentioned during the first stages of the trial, I do know what he looks like, and he hasn't been there. He lives in Western Australia, but quite a long way away.
yeah. We don't know whether he'll be called, do
Well,
we?
that's the other thing. There's a
Yeah.
witness. There's an order for witnesses out of court, as there always
Yeah.
is, with a
So
few
that's- yeah.
exemptions. And maybe they've been told, well, we
Yeah.
might need you. So
Well, it
you
has
know.
been mentioned a number of times as being as part of the various girlfriends who've come forward actually met Bradley through Troy, or they've been
Yeah.
out drinking together. So I should imagine, yes, he could be, because we're not told who the witnesses are. It's a very unusual trial, in fact, that things just pop up during the day for our purposes, like one-liners that don't seem to go anywhere. And in particular this week, when we heard about his second wife being fearful.
Yes.
Yeah,
for her
we
life.
discussed that
Have we
yesterday.
discussed it? I've been out of that. Okay,
No,
sorry,
no,
because
but
I'm
I
still
mean-
curious as to what.
Well,
and
we all are saying, well, why is no one asking the
And what
question?
was-
Well,
and what was
somebody asked the
answer?
question.
They obviously were worried about what the answer was going to be. I mean,
Yes.
both sides. So, I mean, that's what everybody's coming up to me saying. So, what was she fearful about
Yes.
today? What?
Well, it's the question on everybody's lips in Western
Oh,
Australia.
okay. And still will be. Yeah.
And still will be, because Tim was explaining yesterday that really that witness is finished with. So we
Yeah.
will never get the answer to that question, or we will never get the question, let alone the
No.
answer.
Well, until and when she wants to maybe possibly speak publicly after the
Yeah.
whole legal process is over, which she's within her rights to do that.
It was very curious,
there
wasn't
Yeah,
it?
very. It was. Yes, it was. It was a strange portion of a very strange week.
Yes, it's been a very remarkable week. Do we know what's in store for next week?
So early.
We know we're having late nights.
Yeah. So yeah, Monday. There is a witness, who was the boyfriend of Mr. Edwards' first wife. He's the man who moved in with them, then started a romantic relationship with the first wife, and then got her. Eventually, they moved out and got pregnant together. He's now living overseas, got a long way away overseas, so there has to be a video link set up for him to give his evidence very remotely, and because of the distance there is a time difference, so we will be starting at 12 o'clock Western Australian time on Monday, which is 2 hours later than we usually do, and then sitting later into the night to accommodate him. And because of the technical issues of getting the video link set up and his availability and all that, the judges basically said, we're going to do it in one go, we'll go as late as we need to. He's trying to get a guesstimate from both sides of how long it might be. They've set up a 4-hour time slot for the video link, and they think they will comfortably cover his evidence in that time. So yeah, there's
today
been a few late nights this week, but it's going to be
Yes.
even later next week.
Today, they actually said they're getting through the witnesses a lot quicker than they expected.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing, Alex. We'd expected, I think, a bit more. Well, a bit more meat on the bones, to be honest. And we all anticipated we're going to be key witnesses, 2 ex-wives, ex-girlfriends, close friends. But Ms. Barbagallo said this morning they've rattled through them. They rattled through them so quick she ran out of witnesses yesterday. So tried to juggle something, and then promptly got a
Scolded,
ticking off
didn't
by
she?
the judge for trying to bring witnesses forward, which Mr. Jovich says was unfair on him because he didn't know they were coming. So
Well, he was only told, the defence said they were only told about an hour and a half before court started that this witness was popping up, and he couldn't have the time to prepare for it.
yeah, and that was a little bit of
Argy-bargy.
battle within the battle, I suppose.
Yeah.
A little bit of jousting. Mr. Jovich saying, "Well, Your Honour, you know, defence fairness and all that," and then Ms. Barbagallo said, "Well, they're human beings. We've got to try and do what I do." But I think it's fair to say Justice Hall came down on the side of the defence and
Said, move on.
Yeah, move on.
Well, you all had predicted that nothing about this trial would be ordinary. And I think from what we've seen this week, that is absolutely true. I mean, there have been bombshells that nobody saw coming. There was dramas outside the courtroom this week.
Yeah. Yes.
This sort of trial does attract
Oh yeah.
a
it does.
certain type of person.
Fringe element, shall we say? And there's been a few of those around. The security guards have been kept busy. The lovely Geordie man downstairs who runs the coffee shop in the court's been kept very
Getting free
busy,
coffees.
which he's quite happy about. I understand his tills have been chinging all week.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, mechanically, it's been a trial. There was there was a judge, there was 2 lawyers, there was an accused, there was some family, there were 2 openings, and then some evidence. But apart from that, it's been anything but normal, and that's purely to do with the emotion, the subject matter, the interest.
And we've only gone through 1 week.
And we're only 5 days into possibly what could be a 6, 8, 9 month trial. So
That's right.
So yeah, and as you say, it's been as dramatic and as vivid and as visceral as we all sort of thought, I think.
Yes.
But I mean, maybe
The
even
interest is there. No, the interest is there.
And more to come.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Well, a very eventful week. Thank you both. You've obviously been working very, very long hours and sitting in that courtroom, which isn't always the most comfortable place to sit for hours and hours on end. Thanks for keeping us informed, and thank you all for listening. Tune in Monday for day 6 of the trial. We'll be back in court. You guys will be back in court, and we hope you can join us for the next podcast of Claremont in Conversation.
This podcast was hosted by Natalie Bonjolo, produced by Kate Ryan and Alicia Preedy, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Audio files were provided from the archives of the 7 Network and the West Australian. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au.